What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to another video. Week 3 in the NFL is officially in the books, and boy, have we gotten a lot of injuries to big stars. Just to name a few: Saquon Barkley, Christian McCaffrey, Mike Thomas, Julio Jones, Devontae Adams, Marlon Mack, Phillip Lindsay, Courtland Sutton, Drew Lock, DJ Chark, and really the list keeps going. I can name a lot more. Today, we're going to discuss 5 players who are underperforming so far this season fantasy-wise, who I believe you can get at a discount. I think these players will turn their fantasy seasons around and could help you flip your fantasy season around also. I will also give you guys a quick list at the end of the video of players who aren't buy lows, but these are players who I really just want to have on my team, and I'm willing to make some major trades in order to make that happen. Alrighty, let's check out my first player. My first player on this list is going to be David Johnson. Now, David Johnson is getting off to a pretty slow start this season. His week 1 performance was great. 11 carries, 77 yards, a touchdown, 3 catches, 32 yards. That's a pretty good performance. He looked explosive, as you'll see on this touchdown run. He makes a nice jump cut behind the line of scrimmage, and he bursts through the hole, and when he gets to the second level, he gives that guy like a stiff arm, but when he gives him the stiff arm, he's able to really just accelerate away from him and bounce it outside and get to the end zone. He just does a great job of really exploding and really showing me once again that David Johnson's kind of back. I watched that game live and I said to myself, literally tweeted it, that David Johnson is back. And when I say David Johnson is back, I don't necessarily mean he's back to the 2016 version of himself. I think that version might have been a little bit quicker, just a little bit smoother on cuts, but I still think, current day David Johnson is still a great player. He's nowhere near the same player we saw last year in Arizona. That player was a shell of himself. This year's David Johnson is maybe a step down from the 2016 version, but I still think that's a great NFL player, not close to being washed. The problem with DJ, or in our case, since we're trying to buy low, good thing, is in weeks 2 and 3 combined, David Johnson has 24 carries for 57 yards, 2.3 yards per carry, 1 touchdown, 4 receptions for 39 yards. And in week 2, he had 6 fantasy points. In week 3, he had 11.6 fantasy points. So not great outputs for a starting running back. So you may be asking yourself, why do I like David Johnson? My first reason is Houston had one of the most brutal schedules through the month of September that I can remember. Week 1, they're at Kansas City. Week 2, Baltimore Ravens. Week 3, at the Pittsburgh Steelers. Those are 2 of the best defenses in the entire NFL. And these are potentially the top 3 teams that with the highest odds to make the Super Bowl out of the AFC. The good thing for the Houston Texans and David Johnson as a whole is their upcoming schedule. Week 4, the Texans play the Vikings at home. The Vikings in week 1 gave up 66 yards and a touchdown to Aaron Jones. Week 2, 101 yards and 1 touchdown to Jonathan Taylor. And in week 3, gave up 119 yards and 2 touchdowns to Derrick Henry. Then the Houston Texans take on the Tennessee Titans in week 6. The Titans allow the 4th most rushing yards per game in the NFL. Week 1, Melvin Gordon ran for 78 yards, a touchdown. Week 2, James Robinson ran for over 100 and a touchdown. And in week 3, Dalvin Cook demolished the Titans, running for 181 yards and a touchdown. So there's a lot of rushing yards coming David Johnson's way in the upcoming weeks. So this is the week to go after David Johnson, because if you wait too long and he blows up against the Vikings or the Titans, you're going to miss your opportunity to get him at a real discount. Next up on my list is another DJ, Deontay Johnson of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, one question I have for you is Deontay Johnson the number 1 receiver in Pittsburgh? I think so. Johnson has gotten a massive amount of targets so far this season. In week 1, he's got 10 targets, week 2, 13, and in week 3, he got 2 deep shots, but then got knocked out with a concussion. Deontay Johnson has looked great on film. He's super springy after the catch. He's that guy that has a ton of wiggle that's going to make a bunch of guys miss. He made some great catches this year, while having some mental mistakes with a few drops. He fumbled a reverse that lost major yardage for Pittsburgh, but altogether, I think he looks pretty good on film. I can see a scenario where the Johnson owner is not necessarily frustrated with his play, but sees Juju Smith-Schuster grabbing 3 touchdowns and a 2-point conversion already this season, and thinks that Deontay Johnson is the number 2 in Pittsburgh and that Juju is the red zone weapon. Deontay Johnson seems like a player who's going to have a safe floor week in and week out. I'm not sure how big his booms are going to be, but if he's going to be getting double-digit targets from Big Ben every week, then I think you have to make a move for him. He currently has a concussion, so he may not play in week 4, but I would assume he'll return in week 5 if he doesn't already for week 4. If there's a Johnson owner in your league whose season is falling apart, maybe they can't afford a week without having a solid player in the lineup, missing DJ. That's when I think you should swoop in and get yourself a weekly wide receiver 2 with wide receiver 1 upside. Next up on my list is Julian Edelman. This one will be a little bit shorter than the other guys. Now, Edelman is such a great player, and he's easily the go-to weapon in New England. The weeks he has underperformed, the Patriots as a team just weren't throwing enough. Look at the upcoming games where I'm going to assume the Patriots are going to have to throw and score a lot of points in order to keep up with the opposing team. Week 4, Kansas City Chiefs. Week 7, San Fran 49ers. Week 8, the Buffalo Bills. Week 10, the Baltimore Ravens. Week 12, the Arizona Cardinals. Week 14, the LA Rams. And then Week 16, the Buffalo Bills. I mean, I just think things are going to be looking up for Edelman, and he's proven already that he's the go-to weapon for Cam Newton in this offense. The only other New England player that has been useful for fantasy football was Rex Burkhead last week for 1 week where he filled in. We've seen Edelman already break his career high in receiving yards for a single game this year. I think the Edelman owners are getting frustrated with Cam Newton getting so many rushing TDs, 4 already this year, and Edelman's lack of consistent targets. I think you can get Julian Edelman at a huge discount right now, and I wouldn't wait too long because of that upcoming schedule that I mentioned earlier. If he balls out in an upcoming week, you might lose your shot to get him at a discount. Next up on my list is another DJ in DJ Moore of the Carolina Panthers. Now, throughout me breaking down DJ Moore, I'll be showing off plays of over 10 yards and targets over 10 yards, and there's been quite a few for him this year. DJ Moore is currently ranked as the wide receiver 29 in half-point PPR leagues. Moore has not lived up to his draft cost of being a 4th or 5th round pick. So far this season, DJ Moore has 26 targets, 14 receptions, 239 yards, and 0 touchdowns. In week 1, he scored 7.4 fantasy points. Week 2, 16 fantasy points, which is pretty good. And then week 3, 7.5. Now, while those stats aren't terrible, the issue for fantasy owners of DJ Moore is the fact that Robbie Anderson is playing very well. Robbie Anderson currently has 24 targets, 20 receptions, 278 yards, and a touchdown. He's currently the wide receiver 7 in fantasy football. And what's weird for DJ Moore is he's been playing pretty much the opposite role from last year. Of Moore's 14 catches this season, 10 of them have gone for over 10 yards, where last season, he was really a check down or, the short yardage guy. Last season, DJ averaged 13.5 yards per catch. So far in 2020, Moore is averaging over 17 yards per catch. And then look at these targets from the week 1 game. There are a lot of deep targets, and short targets were just some miscues. A miss on a screen, a missed crossing route that's dropped. I think DJ Moore will get more consistent as the weeks go on. I also think with all the deep targets that Moore is getting, he hasn't really hit on many of them yet. With the amount of deep targets he is getting, I think he's bound to catch a few of them coming up here soon. I think the DJ Moore owner is in a tough spot, as they may have gone RB early in drafts like most people did. So Moore may be some people's wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2, and at that spot, he is severely underperforming. I think things go back to normal with Robbie Anderson being a highly targeted player. That just doesn't make sense to me because DJ Moore is the best weapon on the Carolina Panthers without Christian McCaffrey. So before DJ Moore has his big blow-up game, make a trade and go after, I think, a really underrated receiver in the NFL. The last player for the buy low category is Mark Andrews. Now, I wasn't on board with him as a high draft pick this summer, but the way he's playing is way worse than I even expected him to play. Andrews has been flat out unlucky so far this season. In 2018, Mark Andrews' catch rate was 68%. In 2019, it was 65.3. In 2020, it's 52.9, so basically 53%. In week 1, Mark Andrews scored 20.3 fantasy points, week 2, 3.4, and then week 3 on Monday Night Football, 3.7 on 8 targets and only caught 3 passes. So let's talk about why Andrews hasn't been performing. Lamar Jackson on Monday Night Football only threw for 97 yards that game. Mark Andrews should have caught a red zone target thrown his way that I'll show on the screen right here. And then, of course, Nick Boyle caught a touchdown instead of Andrews. Week 1 for the Baltimore Ravens, Lamar Jackson looked sharp. He looked really precise with his accuracy. He found Andrews a couple times in that game, and Andrews had a big day. In week 2, Andrews was only targeted 3 times in a pretty easy win for Baltimore. And of course, on Monday Night Football, like I said, Lamar Jackson only threw for 97 yards. No fantasy weapon is going to be productive on 97 yards. Coming into the season, I don't think the Mark Andrews drafters really expected his receiving yards to go up, but they thought the touchdowns would stay the same. And surprisingly, they're not. Mark Andrews is currently ranked 8th in the NFL in red zone targets with 6. He has 2 touchdowns, but they came in 1 game. I really do expect Mark Andrews' production to pick up. He's a red zone weapon with one of the best quarterbacks in the entire NFL. Mark Andrews is a good player, and I expect the touchdowns to really pick up coming after this week. All right, those are my buy lows. Now let's talk about some guys that I just want to buy in general, regardless of the price. Now, number 1 on my list is a combo of Nick Chubb or Kareem Hunt. Nick Chubb is just so good. You know, it's going to suck because you know there's going to be a week where Nick Chubb doesn't score the touchdown and Kareem Hunt comes in and does. And vice versa. It's going to happen one of these days. But I feel really confident that Nick Chubb, if you wanted to buy Nick Chubb, is going to get first crack. You know, he gets drives to himself, and then Kareem Hunt comes in for a couple drives to spell him. You know what I mean? They don't want Nick Chubb to get 20 to 30 carries a game. They want to keep him in the 15 to 20 range, which I completely understand. And Kevin Stefanski really understands that Cleveland's a running team. It's not Baker rolling out and throwing bombs to Odell Beckham. It's a running offense. And what I like so much about Nick Chubb is he gets the first cracks and he's good on the goal line. And for Kareem Hunt, I love that they use him as a pass catcher. I mean, he scored a touchdown last week. He was, outside. He was an outside receiver and ran, I guess, an okay route. I mean, it was just a curl route, but he caught it and made a guy miss and got into the end zone. So the Cleveland backfield, I just kind of want a piece of it. Next up on my list is Josh Jacobs. Now, Josh Jacobs has had a weird fantasy season. Week 1, he scored 3 touchdowns. Then weeks 2 and 3, no touchdowns. He's been held under 100 yards, but got a lot of carries. And I think that's the appeal for me is he's definitely the guy in Oakland. He's gotten 25 carries, 27, and 16 carries, while he caught a couple passes in each game, 4, 3, and 3. You know, I just think Josh Jacobs is a special player. I think he's one of those just not huge, but he has the great balance. He really just takes hits. He has the short area quickness, a lot like Kareem Hunt and Aaron Jones, who I'll talk about in a second. If he's getting, 15 plus carries every single week, it's just a guy that I think you can get on a buy low right now because he's disappointing. Some people probably took him as their first round pick. I know I did in one of my leagues, and I'm not the happiest with his performance right now outside of the week 1. But I think Josh Jacobs will really pick it up, and getting that many carries, the touchdowns and the yardage, it'll come. The last guy on my list is Aaron Jones. Now, coming into this draft season, I was way wrong on Aaron Jones. I was way lower than I should have been. I thought the player was a pretty good talent, but the situation he was in with the Packers drafting A.J. Dillon, he scored so many touchdowns last year on not a lot of yards, only, I believe, a little bit over 1,000 rushing yards. I just kind of didn't believe it because if the touchdowns came down, I don't know. I just didn't really buy into it, and I regret my decision. I mean, Aaron Jones is the real deal. He's a lot like Josh Jacobs, which I just mentioned. He's not the biggest guy in the world, but he's great around the goal line. He can catch passes. He has that short area burst, the balance, just the vision, the acceleration. He's not amazing at any one thing, but all around, I think he's pretty good, if not great, at a lot of things. So Aaron Jones and that Packers offense, I feel pretty confident. I mean, so far this year, he has he has 4 rushing touchdowns in 3 weeks with a 40-point game in week 2 against Detroit. That's just a great performance. I don't think this is a guy you're going to be able to buy low just because he seems pretty steady and he had that big, blowout game. So you're going to have to pay up for him. But I really think that Aaron Jones is going to be one of those guys that he's consistent all year and you're going to want him on your team. And all right, those are my fantasy football buys. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Let me know down below if you like the people I picked for this list. I think they're all pretty attainable players, and I think they can all bounce back from where they started. If there's anybody else that you think you should buy low on this early in the season, let me know down in the comments below, or hit me up on Twitter at EvankTheTankFF. I'll be bringing you more fantasy football content as the season comes along, and if you're interested in betting, betting real life NFL games, I post a weekly video on 5 bets that I usually take every week. So far, we're doing pretty well, so hey, give it a view, and I'll see you guys next time.